All right. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Auberg speaking from the Liberty Prairie Foundation. I'm really glad that you're joining us today for the last of our scheduled webinars on farming and insect life. Really excited about having Paul and Anna today with us for farmers farming with insects. Really looking forward to this, especially and grateful to everyone who is joining us. We've seen a number of people come to multiple webinars, and we're really grateful for that. As you know, the purpose of this webinar series is just to kind of be part of the larger movement of enabling farmers and farmland owners to better steward their land and water, and to also enable farmers to have long-term resilience and success. And that's really, really important. We're paying particular attention to farmland owners in the marketing of this series. About 60% of Illinois farmland is owned by someone who doesn't farm with himself. And so in those situations, there's so much land then that's being jointly farmed really by both the farmland owner and the farmer. And it's been our experience and our impression that a lot of farmland owners don't have the support or encouragement or information they need to really be as stewardship minded as many of them want to be. And we want to help change that. I represent, as I mentioned, the Liberty Prairie Foundation. We're a nonprofit based in the Prairie Crossing Conservation Community in Grace Lake, Illinois. That's in Lake County, which is in the northeast corner of Illinois. We own and operate a 94-acre organic farm. We use the farm in our programs to demonstrate, support, and promote sustainable agriculture in the region. I particularly represent our Northeast Illinois Farming Program. It's a land access program designed to bring together landowners and farmers, help them find each other, and hopefully have the skills and support they need to work out good land tenure arrangements. You can find our website at illinoisfarmlink.org. I also want to give really special thanks to our funder, our underwriter, Food Land Opportunity, localizing the Chicago Food Shed. This is a funding cooperative organized by the Chicago Community Trust and the Kinship Foundation. The goal of Food Land Opportunity is to create and support a resilient local food economy that protects and conserves land and other natural resources. They've been so generous to us and to many other nonprofit good groups here in the Chicago region. We're grateful for that. I also want to offer some thanks to the McHenry County Conservation District. I mentioned landowners before. In the greater Chicago area, we have a number of public farmland owners that own thousands of acres of farmland. And the McHenry County Conservation District has been really thoughtful and innovative as they begin to try to update their farmland management program so it reflects their values around conservation, natural resource conservation, as well as being part of their community. They've been very thoughtful, and we've been very honored to be part of their progress and their journey towards better farmland stewardship. In fact, the genesis of this series came from my conversation with Ed Collins, who's the Director of Natural Resources for the district. We were brainstorming about what kind of information and knowledge would be really helpful for their staff to sort of figure out how to best steward their farmland. And Ed asked his staff, and his staff came back with a number of really interesting questions. And one of those questions that really rose to the top was the question of how do different farming practices intersect with insect life? Because insect life is so much at the foundation of ecology and our natural world. And some people might say, well, maybe that's fine for a conservation district, but what about just regular people? How much do insects really matter? Is that just a niche concern? And I would say no. What we've learned from regenerative farming that's been really growing in popularity and success is that when farmers and farmland owners work together and have practices that promote as much life as possible in that farm, you get healthier food, more beautiful landscapes, you get more resilient farmers who don't have to rely on inputs as much. And so the degree to which you have diverse insect life on your farm in some ways reflects the long-term, it's a great index or indicator for the long-term success of your farm. So we're very fortunate to have Paul and Anna today with us. I'm going to introduce them very shortly. They come at the end of our series, where we've heard mostly from researchers and academics and a few people who are doing demonstration farms. And we've learned a great deal. What we're going to get from Paul and Anna is the story of actual farmers trying to make a living in a real world with real weather and applying these principles. And it's such a nice way of wrapping up the scheduled part of the series. You're going to find out that they have a lot in common, but they also have some things that aren't in common. So Paul is operating at around a little bit less than 400 acres in Iowa. And Anna is with her husband, Doug, farming over 9,000 acres in Montana. Different weather, different crops. Anna was saying that they're actually going to be harvesting, I think, 15 different small grains this year. That's a really different farming operation. But what they have in common is they're not using neonicotinoids. They're using cover crops. They're using prairie strips. And they're being just really thoughtful. And they have a mindset of let's work with nature and be creative. What I've also found interesting in just talking with them is that they both have engineering backgrounds, which is really cool. And I think that's probably helped them out in terms of how they think systematically. So we're going to start with Paul, and just a few quick management notes before I start with Paul. Number one, we are recording this. You can find this and other recordings at our YouTube channel. You just go to YouTube, search for Liberty Prairie Foundation. We are going to have everyone muted and their video off during the main presentation sessions so that we get as much bandwidth as possible. At the end, I'd like everyone to reveal themselves, so to speak, make sure you're dressed appropriately, and allow our speakers to see their audience, which I think will be really helpful. If you want to ask questions, please use the chat function. That's at the bottom center panel of your Zoom screen. Press chat, it'll bring up a screen and you can type in your message and press return, and then we'll see that. And with that, I'm going to move to Paul. Both of the speakers have agreed to kind of introduce themselves. I'm so happy to sort of have gotten to know Paul a little bit. I think you're really going to get to really enjoy hearing what he has to say. Paul, can you take it away?
Okay, I'll try. See if we can get this all to work. You're not getting anything, are you?
Oh, hello.
No. Hey, hi there.
How's it going?
Good. Do you mind muting yourself and shutting down this, stopping the video for the moment?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay,
all right.
You have me now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, all right, we'll try this. All right, I am Paul Mugge. I farm in Sutherland, Iowa, which is the northwest corner of Iowa. This is the farmhouse where I grew up since I was 1 year old. It's the old family farm. And I took over operation of it in 1976. It has been fully organic since 2002. And what I would like to do here is talk for a few minutes really quickly about how and why I farm organically. And I'm really hoping that you guys will ask lots of questions if we have time at the end. So I've been organic for about 20 years. This is my family. I have a wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. I'll mention that again later. So why organic? First, industrial agriculture is unsustainable, mainly because it's callous disregard of ecology. They seek to have just one species in a field. If you have a cornfield, you want corn plants, no other plants, no insects, nothing else. But there are lots of reasons that I became organic. These are some of them. I've always had an interest in environmental issues, and I kind of take the opposite approach from the industrial agriculture. I seek to increase diversity. I utilize free ecosystem services that nature provides as opposed to purchasing synthetic inputs. So it kind of all begins with crop rotations. And this is intended to disrupt pest cycles. Whatever your system is, there will be some insects, some diseases that are particularly adapted to that system. And the longer your rotation is, the better it is. And you need to change things once in a while to keep the pests guessing. If you just have a corn soybean rotation, that's basically a monoculture of summer annual row crops. I rotate many things, not just crops, but I rotate, types of plants, tillage systems, fall seeded versus spring seeded. I use cover crops, but I try and have at least a 3-year rotation. So my current rotation: corn, soybeans, and a small grain. The small grain, number of things. It sort of depends on market conditions at the time. My preference is fall triticale because it gets a fall grain into the system. So the corn is full width tillage because it follows small grain, and there's red clover, usually a cover crop, in that small grain to provide nitrogen for the corn. So that has to be killed. So I have to do full width tillage there. I plant a relatively high population, and it's rotary hoed or harrowed several times, cultivated several times, and those times often don't happen. It's very dependent upon the weather. I do have GPS RTK guidance, and it works. Usually, I have disasters occasionally. Soybeans, I ridge till soybeans. I'm not sure how many of you would be familiar with that. It's a system. These rows on the left of this picture have been planted. The ones on the right have not. So there's no pre-plant tillage. I build fairly big ridges in the corn as I cultivate. That last cultivation, I throw a lot of dirt to cover up weeds in the row. And then in the spring, I have attachments on the planter that scrape the top inch or two off of that ridge. And in the process, any ears of volunteer corn, any weed seeds, things like that are thrown into the middles where I can cultivate it, and I plant the soybeans right in that old corn row, and it's just a perfect seed bed. This is what it looks like after it's planted, and all that corn residue is still there. It's rotary hoed, doesn't always look this good. It's cultivated several times and then walked. This particular field looks like it's been cultivated twice. It has not been walked yet. I see a few weeds, but there aren't very many weeds. And if you look between the rows, most of that corn residue is still there, protecting the soil. And again, it works most of the time. Winter triticale follows soybeans. It's no-till drilled into the soybean residue right after the soybean combine in October. Looks fairly black here, but a week or two later, you can't hardly tell you've been in it. So basically 2 of the 3 years of my rotation are no-tilled, except that I cultivate. Later in the season, and again, it works. I'd like you to notice the red clover that's underseeded with that triticale. My small grains always have a cover crop underseeded, usually red clover, and I get 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen from that clover for the following corn crop. Pretty picture of that. This is the red clover, probably the first week in September, and I will clip it at this point because there's a few weeds in it, and the red clover will rebound, get ahead of the weeds, so there will be no weeds after that, none going to seed. And it might be a foot or foot and a half tall again by freeze up, and it might be growing up until Christmas time. It's fairly frost hardy. For the rest of my fertility, I have access to some beef cow-calf manure and bedding, and I have a compost turner, so I make that into compost. I also have an 18 kilowatt solar array. I produce all of my own electricity for both my home and for the farm. I'd like to address just a couple of issues, things that people criticize organic farming for. One is energy use. And this is David Pimental. I think he was at Cornell University. As you can see from this slide, conventional agriculture uses about half again as much fossil fuel energy as does organic farming. And the reason for that basically is because of fertilizer. 1% of all the fossil fuel energy used in the world goes to produce anhydrous ammonia for fossil fuel fertilizer. And Roundup is pretty energy intensive also. This is Rodale Institute's 30-year comparison. Yields are equal, it's better in drought, higher soil organic matter, and other measures of soil health like microbial biomass, for example. Organic uses 45% less energy, 30% less greenhouse gases, and of course it's more profitable. So this is about insects. So I'm going to talk about insects. I think this is interesting that in 1945, before all of our chemical pesticides, 7% of the world's crops were lost to insects. 50 years later, after billions of pounds applied, we're losing 14% of the world's crops. So we're winning a battle here and there, but we're losing the war. And it's because of insect resistant to pesticides and because we're killing beneficial insects also. This is another one. This is from, I think, Michigan State University. This is with nematodes. And yeah, nematodes are not insects, but you get the point, I think. And like insects, the hundreds of species of nematodes, there's only a handful of them that are really pathogenic, that are pests. So the vertical axis here is the ratio between the good guys and the bad guys. Higher ratio is better. So they looked at 4 different cropping systems. Number 1 is completely conventional, corn, soybean, wheat. Number 2 is the same as number 1, except they banded the herbicides instead of full width broadcast. Number 3 is the same as number 2, except they use compost instead of commercial fertilizer. And number 4 is a completely organic system. And you can see that the organic system has about 4 times better ratio of good guys to bad guys. One more, this is from Indonesia, where they raise a lot of rice. And they used, I think, 37 different chemicals were approved for applications to rice. And they were making about 4.5 applications per year. And at one point, the Indonesian government said, this is enough. And I've heard that they were prompted by a Hindu priest, and the Hindus, I guess, don't believe in killing much of anything. And so they banned all 37 of those chemicals except for one, and they restricted its use. So they went from 4.5 applications to 0.5 application per year. Cost to the farmer is about 1/4. The cost to the government of Indonesia is about 1/10. Apparently these chemicals were subsidized. And you guys are probably all thinking that this is going to be a flaming train wreck. And yields actually went up because probably they're not killing the good guy insects. So I really don't have any insect pest problems to speak of. I probably would have European corn borers if it weren't for the fact that all of my neighbors use BT corn, and I can't really claim that as being a free ecosystem service, I guess. But I did have problem with this little guy for a while, a soybean aphid that really hammered me for a few years. And then Iowa State University found, I think, 4 genes altogether that give some resistance to soybeans. They developed these aphid-resistant beans. Dr. Matt O'Neill was part of demonstrating the efficacy of that. He spoke last week in this series, and it's extremely effective. And I plant all aphid-resistant beans now. So I really have no problems with diseases and insects. And I don't know how it is in Illinois, but spray planes have been flying over me all day, every day lately. And I really don't have any issues. Okay, I have strips of 3 different ages. The first one was planted 18 years ago. And this, at the time, it was difficult to do because this really wasn't on anybody's radar. My goals were to provide habitat for beneficial insects. I was just getting started in organic farming. I was concerned about that. I wanted to get some diversity on the landscape, some pollinator habitat. I planted trees and shrubs in this also because I wanted a barrier to my neighbor's GMO pollen. And I wanted to provide wildlife habitat. It qualifies for CRP as a living snow fence. It was a 15-year program. I have re-upped, so I still get paid for this. I was concerned initially, and still am, that this might be an ecological trap, especially for birds. You know, this habitat looks really great to mommy bird as a great place to build her nest and lay eggs, but it might be really easy for a fox or a skunk to go right down these narrow strips and wipe out everything there. So it's not a great place maybe to lay eggs after all, and I'm still not sure about that, but there are birds that nest in here. Let's see. It's a field windbreak. This is early in the spring. This is a picture of taken. That's what it looks like now after 18 years, and you can see the trees. In retrospect, it may have been a mistake to plant the trees because it means that I can't burn this strip or I would kill the trees. So yeah, I'm not sure about that. This is for you, Nathan. Nathan asked for a picture of an anthill. It turns out it's really, really difficult to take a meaningful picture of an anthill in a prairie. But these are everywhere. It's really hard to walk out there actually because you're tripping over anthills all the time. Some of them are approaching a foot high and maybe 2 feet in diameter. So sorry I couldn't get a better picture, Nathan, but this is all I have.
That's all right, Paul.
Okay, thanks. This is another one from later in the season, and it's a different part. There really isn't anything flowering there. So after that, 18 years ago, this is it in the fall, I kind of looking for more things to help me out as far as pest control. And Dr. Matt Liebman at Iowa State University, who's also on the STRIPS team, was looking at seed predation, and one female cricket ate 223 pigweed seeds in one day. And if you leave these seeds on the surface, at the end of a year, upwards of 90% of them might be eaten by something. But you can't disturb it with tillage. You can't do fall tillage and bury those weed seeds. And you have to provide them some habitat so they have a place to live the rest of the year. This is one of the main ones. It's a ground beetle. Dr. Kurt Larson at Luther College in Iowa is doing some work on this now. He looked at 4 different farms, counted, I think, 1,400 different ground beetles, 43 different species, and 26 species per farm. The thing is, they are very susceptible to insecticides and ground disturbance because they live in the litter layer. So it's organic farming is a perfect habitat for them, and prairie strips and organic farming really go well. This is some of Matt's work at Iowa State. In my case, like with soybeans, where I don't disturb those weed seeds for 7 months, if you add invertebrates like birds into the mix and worms, they control like 70% of my weed seeds are eaten, and I need all the help I can get with weed seeds. Management, again, you have to leave them on the surface and provide habitat. I do have some bees. These are actually bees. I love having them around. They were doing some research with neonicotinoid insecticides a few years ago. And beneficial insects, I know just barely above nothing about insects, but I'm pretty sure that most of the ones that are out there, and there are a lot of them out there, most of them are beneficial. I was also intrigued by the hedgerows in Great Britain that they've been doing for a long, long time. And yeah, this is not prairie, but it's a different biome there. And so I think it's somewhat similar. And their numbers, the species richness and diversity of bees and syrphids pretty closely match what the strips team has found at Iowa State. One thing that really intrigued me was how far they move out into the crop. This actually was in tomatoes, I think, but 200 meters away from the hedgerow, you still have twice as many of these seed predators as you do in fields that don't have hedgerows. The Iowa State Strips project, about that last week. I hope everybody watched that. Strips guys, it's a great program. So I just have some pictures of that. I lifted these off the Iowa State's brochures. Other benefits, you know, they incorporate prairie into regular production farmland. So I get erosion control, reduced nitrate losses, improving organic matter and stability, water infiltration, water quality, pest biocontrol, and seed predation. And, whoops, I'll just do this really quickly because they talked about it last week, but at the end of the day, you get 32% less water runoff, 95% less soil export, 82% less nitrogen export, and 89% less phosphorus. So they are as effective as terraces and a lot cheaper. And the thing that doesn't get mentioned is that they're just plain beautiful. They're really pretty. There's something therapeutic about going out and walking in a prairie. I can't really explain it, but I feel it. So this is the next group of strips that I did. This is an aerial view. They're in the upper left corner of your picture there. They're the lighter green strips in that field. The yellow is grass waterway and field boundaries. So in my case, the strips, they're on the contour, of course. They end on one end on a grass waterway. They end on the other end in a field grass border. And the crop rows themselves also end in the waterway. There are no rows that are parallel to the waterway. So the idea is that any water that runs off will be directed into the grass waterway and will run off relatively clean. You can kind of see that here. My waterways end up with a sawtooth pattern because I plant 12 rows at a time and I plant right into the waterway and turn on the waterway. These are these strips this year. This is organic soybeans in the foreground and organic corn in the background beyond that second strip. And they're pretty. This is a beetle bank. These strips I incorporated or tried to a beetle bank on one edge of each strip where I planted, the soil is bermed up a little bit and it is planted to a few more bunch grasses than the rest of the strip. This is, you can see the residue from last year's bunch grasses there in the tan. And that's all to provide habitat for those beetles. Oregon State University is currently doing quite a bit of research on beetle banks. The newest strip, and this was with help from Xerxes Society, they provided the seed. My idea was, since I have RTK guidance, I know where my rows are going to be from one year to the next. So I planted the whole field to corn. Then where I wanted a strip that matched my 12-row, 30-foot planter, I tore those 12 rows out, and that's where I seeded the strip. And I just used, you know, a spinner 3-point seeder. I drug the old Western land roller out of the grove. This isn't rocket science. These plants are supposed to grow here, so it doesn't take much to get them growing. This was later that same year after they'd been mowed. The first year you're going to have to mow probably twice because it's going to be all weeds. And in fact, the green things that you see growing there are probably weeds. But now this is 2 years later. This is this year. It's tilled beside it because that was field peas and it's going to get a cover crop seeded shortly. But you can see these prairie plants are 4 feet tall, and they're pretty. Okay, some of the challenges. The main thing for me has been Canada thistle. It's like when you stop doing tillage on an area, there's must be seed there that is just waiting for its chance to grow, and they're difficult to control. You have to keep mowing them. In the 18-year-old strip, I've almost gotten rid of them. I'm to the point where I can just go out with a weed eater and weed eat them when they bud. And so I'm getting a handle on it, but it's kind of a constant battle. Mare's tail has been mentioned as a weed that's problematic. I have some mare's tail that were in the strips, but it's really not been a problem in the crop ground. Brome or non-native encroachment, yeah, that's an issue. And even some of the native prairies in my part of the world have encroachment by brome grass, and I'm not sure what you do about that. There's a possibility that some of these plants could be alternate hosts for some diseases that are pests to crops, and I am not the guy to ask about that. And some of the insects that I'm providing habitat for might be pests. I hope not, but again, I don't know. And if you're a conventional farmer, insecticide and herbicide applications can be an issue, especially like I mentioned, the spray planes are flying now. If they're spraying insecticide on aphids, that's going to be a problem for the narrow strips. I don't think you're going to be able to keep the insecticide off of them. But it's worth it at the end of the day. This plant was a contaminant, I think, in the mix that I planted. I think it is Mexican hat. Somebody's probably going to check on that, but I only found one of them, but it's really pretty. This was at a field day I had at my farm last year. Xerxes Society, Practical Farmers of Iowa, and the Iowa Organic Association sponsored this. The person talking is Lydia English. She was with the Strips Project. She helped cataloging the different plants that were in my strip. I really like this picture because everybody here is looking and listening to Lydia, and I'm off to the side someplace looking at this cloud in the background. And about 1 minute after this picture was taken, I loaded everybody up, and it was about a mile to home that we did in road gear with the tractors and racks, and we got home just as it started pouring down rain. So we made it. This picture again, this is my family. There's I think it's a Native American proverb that says, we don't inherit the land from our fathers, we borrow it from our children. And I think this is more important now than ever as we're looking at probably unprecedented extinction of species. We're looking at climate change, losses of natural resources, and we all need to think to the future. This is what it's all about, and I don't have answers, so that's why I'm turning it over to Anna to tell us about the future. So I guess we have a few questions now, Nathan, is that right?
Thanks. Yeah, so if folks could share some questions in the chat, that would be awesome. I guess my first question, Paul, would be, can you say just a little bit more about what the beetle bank is and what you hope to get from that?
They've been doing beetle banks in Europe for quite a while, and it's just a habitat that's provided especially for beetle habitat because they're such great seed predators. And in Europe, they build a pretty big berm of soil. They build it up quite a bit, and I didn't really have a good way of doing that. So I built it up a little bit, but it's probably only bermed up about 6 inches. And then I seeded the whole strip, but then in that area of the beetle bank, about 5 feet on the edge, I went over it again and seeded some bunch grasses, an extra 5 or 6 species of grasses to hopefully create that habitat for those beetles and probably field crickets and other things.
Okay. By the way, Anna clarifies, she says, Paul, that flour is Mexican hat. We call it prairie cone flour and use it in our mixes. So you were right.
That's
Can you
a
say
cell phone. That's a cell phone plant identification app. That's what that is.
And then Paul, can you also, while we're waiting for other questions, can you also say something about the assistance and support that you've received from the Xerxes Society? We're going to introduce them a little bit later, but can you say something more about the help you've gotten from them?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. I've been familiar with the Xerxes Society for several years, and that's why we kind of planned this latest strip as being a beetle bank. The whole strip is really a beetle bank. So the seed mix is a little heavier on grasses than the previous ones that are more forbs, I guess, just because they're pretty and they're good for pollinator habitat. But this was intended to be a beetle bank, really the whole strip. Xerxes paid for the seed for this and helped me with the planning. My original strip I mentioned was CRP. It was a 15-year program. And I've re-upped, so I'm still collecting on that. The strips that I did 5 years ago, those were CSP, and they called that, I don't have it right in front of me, so a long name that was the practice for that. And the payout is significant, but it's complicated, and the program has changed a couple times since then. So if you're interested in that, you should really talk to your NRCS people. And of course, now we have CRP program that specifically lists the prairie strips as applicable. So Xerxes has helped mostly with the planning and support, and paid for the seed in the last strip.
Okay. I guess one last question. Can you very briefly describe the difference between CRP and CSP? I mean,
yeah, CRP has been around for a long time, the Conservation Reserve Program. And that just areas, it takes larger areas in most basins out of production and plants them to a permanent vegetation. CSP is a more recent development. It's a Conservation Stewardship Program. And that was intended to reward farmers for things that they do on working, productive agricultural land. And which is this, I farm 90% of the land. So that's the difference. And that's a 5-year program, and my 5 years is up. I'm eligible to reapply and maybe have to add strips or something to be eligible again.
Got it. We have a question from Brad. He says the biggest complaint about organic farming is increased tillage and cultivation necessary to control weeds. Do you conduct soil tests, and are you concerned about loss of organic matter or soil insects?
Yes, and for all questions. I wish I could eliminate more trips, but my trips are fast and light. I do have soil tests, and my organic matter is considerably higher than my conventional neighbors. I have several fields that are up over 5% soil organic matter, whereas my neighbors are more like 3%. So it's good in terms of soil health, probably because I use a lot of cover crops. And again, 2 of the 3 years are no tillage prior to planting. And I agree with you. I wish I could eliminate trips, but yeah, I have to control weeds somehow. And there are people that are doing organic no-till with roller crimping rye and planting soybeans, and there's a lot of effort being put into this right now. So hopefully it will get better as more research is done. Thank you.
Okay, that was a great question. Does anyone else have any questions? Can you also explain just real briefly, because we have people who are not farmers on the call, what RTK guidance is?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. It's a satellite-based GPS system. RTK, there's different levels of it as to how accurate you can be. and RTK is one of the best. And you have a receiver on your tractor, and it steers the tractor, and it's very helpful to an organic farmer because I know exactly where my rows are going to be from one year to the next, so I don't end up with stub rows. Because if I have 10 rows before a fence and I have a 12-row cultivator, it's a real problem trying to cultivate that. So I don't want stub rows, and the gut system really helps with that. I get my rows exactly where they want to be.
And what do you mean by stub rows?
Stub rows are rows that maybe don't go the full length of the field.
Got it. Okay. And you've had a lot of experience, obviously long experience, probably longer than many people with prairie strips. Have you had any challenges with managing vegetation in those strips, especially if you can't burn or you feel like you don't want to burn because of the trees?
Yeah, that's a good question. The later plant strips have been burned, and the main issue within the strip is the Canada thistle, and again some brome encroachment. And people worry about encroachment of the prairie plants into the crop field itself. I have not had a problem with that at all. These prairie plants don't like tillage, so that has not been an issue for me.
Okay. And I guess one of the other questions, I mean, I think people sometimes might be concerned, well, if we go away from conventional, can we make a living? I'm not asking for you to share your tax returns on the screen, but are you guys doing pretty well, or how do things work financially for you guys?
For me, it's working very well. The prices for organic grains are historically they stay between 2 and 3 times conventional prices. My yields are going to be a little bit less than my neighbors because for corn I have to plant late, like a month after my neighbors, because I have to plant untreated seed, and it has to grow immediately. And in some years I might be short of nitrogen. For beans, my soybeans might yield a little bit less because they are food type varieties of what I raise. Well, I sell some for seed, but the rest will probably go to Japan for tofu. So there's special varieties that yield a little bit less. And also my cash costs are probably $50 an acre less than conventional guys, because I'm not buying conventional fertilizers and pesticides. I'm not paying technology fees to the biochemical companies, and my costs are less. My yields are not far off, and I get twice the price. So yeah, my farm is very small compared to my neighbors, and I'm making a living. And one of the reasons I listed at the beginning was social. And what's better for our small communities and schools and churches if there are 10 of me making a living on 300 acres and versus one guy going broke on 4,000 acres, So yeah, it's working.
That's good. All right, so why don't we move to Paul? Thank you so much. We'll come back to questions for both of you at the end. But Paul, thank you so much for sharing your life and your farming. Really, really appreciate it. We're now going to move to Anna Jones-Crabtree. You can actually learn a lot about her farming if you look at this book. It's called Lentil Underground: Renegade Farmers and the Future of Food in America. It's written by Liz Carlisle. It's an excellent book, and Anna and her husband Doug feature prominently in the book. But Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you, and really appreciate you taking some time as well.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Nathan. All right, let's see. Let me get to speaker view, right? And then screen share here.
Yep. There you go. It started.
All right. Can everybody see that all right?
Yep. Looking good.
All right. Well, excited to be here. And gosh, Paul, a hard act to follow. And I'd love to just sit down and have a glass of wine or coffee or tea with you and share more farm stories, maybe out in one of our strips. I'm just excited to talk to you a little bit about what Doug and I have tried to do here. I've titled my topic Exploring Edges, Pollination, Prairies, and People. And so you'll hear some of these themes throughout the presentation. I've got 40 slides, but don't be scared. It's a lot of eye candy from Montana that I just thought I'd share with all of you. Here's where we're located. Doug and I are first generation Montana farmers. Doug grew up on a farm in Ohio, traditional farm. It did not survive the crisis of the 80s. So when I met him at Purdue, all he ever wanted to do was farm. And it just took us till we were 40 to figure out how to do it ourselves and do it our own way. We do have a lot of nice Midwest roots. We're both from Purdue graduates, and that has fed a lot, knowing a lot about the system that did not work for his family has fed a lot into the system that we're setting up. I'm an engineer by training, as Nathan said. I've spent a career working for the Forest Service, doing a lot of sustainability work, and that also has influenced our farming system. So here's where we are. We actually farm right on the Canadian border. A little bit about our space that we're in, because it's pretty different than the Midwest. And I just want to make sure you guys can't see my the names and the boxes over here, right? You can just see just the.
No, that's yeah, each person's screen is different. So as long as you're just seeing yourself and the screen, you're good to go.
Okay, then good. So we're in Hill County, Montana. The population's only 16,000, and we're 40 miles outside of the nearest population area, which is 9,800. So it's a 40-mile drive to go get groceries for us. So we're super grateful to be where we are. We kind of have been living a socially isolated life to start with. Our typical crop mix in our area is wheat, more wheat, and fallow. We're only on the edge of a desert, about 11 inches of moisture a year. We have seen hugely increased variability in that, specifically around where the moisture comes, at what time it comes, and how much it comes. So that's of continuing concern for us, and the moisture is something that drives our entire cropping system. Farmland value where we are is also significantly different than where all of you are probably sitting. And that's partly why we landed in Montana. Doug was running the organic certification program for the state. We had a network here, and we probably spent about 4 years really actively, seriously looking for our own opportunity. And we've realized that, guys, if we can't make some cash flow happen here with farmland at this value, then man, what do we have to do with this whole organic system? But we've really come to love it. We started with organic from day one. That was part of our economic plan as well as our sustainability plan. And I'm just every day just amazed at how much the consumer interest is happening around organic food, and yet we aren't really shifting our production system. So in Montana alone, less than 1% of our cropland is actually certified organic. So part of our driving factor is to find a way to bring more acres into a more sane, different production system. Okay, why am I not shifting here? Okay, so we're farming 9,600 acres today. We don't own any more than about 350 of that. Everything else is under a long-term lease agreement with a variety of different landowners, not all of which are actually in state or local. I'm gonna move this column here. We really only farm about half annually is actually cash crop for us. So we've got 12 different crops this year in 2020 that we're harvesting. And that's just, people think about that and they're like, well, you're kind of nuts because you're actually doing all these things. You work way harder, it takes more people to run our farm than it does other farms. And we're also doing significant amount of cover cropping. So like Paul said, the rotation is really the heart of what we're doing. It drives everything. We have both a 5 and a 7 year crop rotation. And then the other thing that we're really proud of is over 29% of our land base is in non-crop conservation. So that's native rangeland. We've got some CRP, and we've actually been able to enroll some of our strips into the CRP pollinator program. So we're receiving a benefit for that. And then with help of Xerces Society and a lot of the NRCS programs that Paul talked about, we also have been able to seed over 400 acres of just native pollinator habitat. Of the 9,600 acres, we've transitioned 3,000 of that from a Kim fallow no-till system. So this is just a view across one of our fields. And our whole driver around our cropping production system is it's got to be more sane. We have to think about lower input costs. We can't buy solutions from a bag or a bottle. Importing things doesn't necessarily help. We have higher crop prices, and we also have been able to negotiate some longer term contracts with organic buyers, and less reliance on technology. You know, what is technology? We tend to think Mother Nature is a pretty amazing world of technology ourselves, and that all adds up to greater returns to management for us. My computer is not shifting. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so we really are spread out 14 miles west to east, 18 miles north to south, and we've got 4 farm individuals is what we like to call them. So the orange, green, yellow, and purple are where all of our land is. The top of the map is the border of Canada and the US. And so each of our farm units has its own personality, and it's kind of its own little microcosm. Here's a picture of one of our field maps. So this is a field that's a mile wide, and you can see our crop rotation across each of the strips that were laid out in strips, 240 feet wide, which works well with our 40 and 60 feet wide equipment. And then in between every one of those crop strips is some sort of pollinator or perennial habitat strip that we have either left in CRP if we brought a field out of CRP into production, or which we've actually seeded to native habitat. And I can talk more about the crop rotation, but I think I won't do that right now. Here's what it looks like from Google Maps. So you can really see our fields are different, and our goal is to actually have both diversity in time with the crops, but also diversity in space. So we have a lot more integrated natural systems within each of our farm fields. Here's a drone shot. We worked with a master's student in filmmaking at Montana State a couple years ago, and she had fun with her drone. And here it is up on place, right up close and personal. So a lot of folks think about, oh, the prairies, why would you live in north central Montana? It's the Northern Great Plains, the wind blows. And I just have to say that working with pollinators and these prairie plants they're so small and fine, and so much detail and so much amazing diversity. Some of our prairie ecosystems on this planet are more biologically diverse than our forests. And when I read that, I was just really amazed. And then when you start living in an ecosystem like this, you really realize how much is out there. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Willa Cather. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, you guys. My screen is not.
Just gotta be patient.
I gotta be patient. All right, well, here's another up close picture of another strip that we have. That's blanket flower, gaillardia. There's a lot of yarrow. The sandfoin is the pink in the front foreground. That's not necessarily a native. We've got a milkweed, and then at the top is a globe mallow. So a lot of people said, and Paul alluded to this, like, oh my gosh, don't those plants all integrate into your fields and cause problems, and you have weeds, and why would you do that? That's just so crazy. And we tend to think that the most exciting and important things ecologically and as humans happen on the edges. So start thinking about where are edges in your world. And when I first put this PowerPoint together, I'm like, oh, edges, carrot cake, the dogs on the edge of the deck, and you can still kind of see the snow. Well, maybe not, but there's still snow out on the ground, but that's a nice warm place. And then you think about the roots of all of the different diversity of plants that you're growing. And so this is a lentil root, and if you can see up close, there's little nitrogen fixing nodules on that root. So there's a lot of fascinating interplay that we don't even begin to understand underground at the edges as well as above. So the other thing is sometimes you can get your head down and just be doing the farming, and you're like, oh man, I don't have time for more of this philosophical ecological stuff. But then you start realizing that if you're thoughtful about your system, and organic, it's really about a system. It's not a checklist of practices, that you end up multi-solving and stacking functions for all sorts of things. So if you do one thing, it leads to all these other amazing benefits. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So here's a slide I stole from our Xerces friends. They have been an amazing partner to us, both in technical assistance and some monetary assistance to try out some new things. But this was a slide from one of our very first pollinator habitat plantings we did with them, which was a project to look at how do you establish prairie plants. And we had really awesome moisture that year. And those strips don't look like that now, unfortunately, but that first year they really, they just established really well. And so the fun thing about this is look at all the other benefits that accrue just because of having this one strip. We've got corridors for wildlife, beneficial insects, there's other wind buffer. You know, we're in a highly wind erosive plains area. And then the fun thing about this picture is there's actually a pollinator in here that they caught. Here's just a few of the insects that we found walking around with some of the Xerces staff. And if you haven't got to know an entomologist, I highly recommend getting one in your address book and having them on speed dial, because once you start looking for things, it is amazing how much comes back right away. These blister beetles, and then there's like this whole reality TV show thing going on in the insect world. Is there's like parasitic insects that'll eat other insects, and it's fascinating. So just show up with a little curiosity, and you'll be amazed at what you start seeing. Another stacking benefit for us is because we're in an ecosystem that's highly wind erosive, not much moisture, and highly erodible soils. Our strips actually do a lot for us in terms of catching snow in the winter. So you can kind of see this here, but it becomes really apparent in the spring when things start melting off. And one of our interns this year was out looking at our rye crop, and she told me that those first few feet on the east side of every one of our strip, the rye was actually 4 feet tall, which was really amazing. So it's these little things that you create little synergies within your overall farm system. The other thing we found, and this is really anecdotal, we don't have any hard data about this, but we actually saw it again this year in some fields that had been chemical, fallow, no-till, farmed in large blocks. When we are in farming those the first year and working to establish the strips, but they're not there yet, we have an awful lot more wildlife encounters. So this is a hawk that Doug found when we were harvesting a couple years ago, and he was able to get out and carefully move it over to one of the strips to be a strip that we hadn't seeded yet. And so Again, no hard data on this, but just generally, I think giving nature a place to live and be your partner and be part of your farm, at least for us, has been a really amazing journey and lots of beneficial outcomes. Because these guys eat things, right? Like these guys eat our ground squirrel population, which is a problem. And it's really fun when you're doing a tillage pass or plowing down some of our cover crops to have hawks like follow you in the tractor, because they'll dive bomb to get the mice that you're moving out of the fields. Bird habitat, I mean, birds are also really important and eat a lot of other insects that you don't want. This is Sarah from Xerces and my friend Joel, who comes to farm camp every year. Just another picture of one of our strips, field buffers at the end of the field. The other thing we found is the integrated strips. We don't drive on them throughout the whole year, but kind of early in that season when we're doing rock picking, it gives us access into the field to see things, manage some of the perennial weed pressure we have in our crops. It's a way to access internally into the field that you might not otherwise have. This is Tim and Ann, interns this year, and we did a little rock picking and had a party afterwards. This is a picture, I have to have the obligatory picture of the Canadian border. So the fence on the left is actually the border of Canada. So, you know, wide field buffers, strips. Another benefit is you stay away from having an international incident once in a while. And I took this from, this is 2017, so it's probably a little dated, but I just wanted to highlight again, Iowa, the prairie strip work. We've been doing this since 2009, but it's so awesome to see some more research coming out on this and the stacked benefits. So it's really, it doesn't just do things for your pollinators. It helps your bird abundance, it helps with water runoff and management, increases your soil and nutrient retention. Biodiversity is really going to be a solution for us for a lot of things. And I think there was a paper or an article Xerces just had not long ago about biodiversity and the importance of biodiversity in terms of handling climate change. So here's just a few details on implementation for all of you, because I'm sure if you're like me as an engineer and you're pragmatic, you want to know, well, how the heck do you do it? It's nice to talk about it, but how do you actually make it happen? For us, clean seed beds are super critical. So yes, you might be cringing. This is a mowboard plow that has been villainized, but this is a really important tool. We don't mowboard plow everything, but when we're establishing strips out of CRP, and most of the CRP that we've had has been, 20, some of it's 30 years in CRP, and there's no biodiversity in it. It's pretty much just a crested wheatgrass monoculture. And so the best thing we can do is kind of start with a reset disturbance activity and turn that over so that we can help the wheatgrass decompose and start rebuilding some soil tilth in that. So for us, given our moisture, we tend to mowboard in the first year, let it sit over the winter, and then do a disking, and then create a seed bed and seed. Here's one of the mixes we've used, and we've been playing around with a lot of mixes over time. This one's mostly native, so yarrow, coneflower, blanket flower, prairie coneflower, that's the flower Paul had. Maximilian sunflower does really well for us, and it's been fun to kind of hone in on what's working. We also tend to include a little alfalfa. It's nice to have some things that can establish variable root depth and provide some of that cover while things are really getting going. This is more of an introduced mix, and again, we've been doing a mix of grasses and other flowering broadleaves. One of the key pieces of all of this is to have patience. Those plants are so well adapted to the ecosystem, but they don't just spring up instantly. So on the picture on the right, you can see I've got, there's a yarrow here coming. This is a Maximilian sunflower coming over here to the right, right under my ring finger is one of the prairie cone flowers starting to come. And this is a picture taken after the second year after we seeded. All of the brown kind of decaying matter is actually tumbleweed. So, you know, Mother Nature doesn't like to be naked. She's gonna cover herself with something. And so you just have to be careful and make sure you get good seed bed, get your seeds in there, hope for the right amount of moisture, and then handle the weeds those first couple years. And don't be surprised, this is a picture, oh gosh, taken probably back in 2014 or probably 2010 or 11 with Doug standing here next to some Maximilian sunflower. So you can see he's got a hat on. This is our very first pollinator seeding project. There's yarrow that's dying off behind him. And this was taken in October. So we were doing some field crop scouting and like, oh my gosh, there's the sunflowers. So the part of designing the seed mixes also is you want to have your critters have something to eat all year. So you want to do early season bloomers, mid-season, and then late season bloomers. This was a habitat day we had, I think, in 2018, and Sarah from Xerces came out. Gosh, just another fun day when you can get people to walk around in fields and look for insects and just look at the small details of different prairie plants. It's a pretty fun people time as well as a good pollinator time. And it rained that day, so I don't know, Paul, what it is with pollinators tours, but rain was a good thing for us that year. On the left is, it's probably a little hard to see, but it's a listing of all of the seeds that we had in one of our seed mixtures. And then Sarah helped us as we did some scouting to see what was most abundant that year. And that was really helpful in future design of seed mixes. And looking on down further, we had several other things that started to show up in our strips that were not part of our original seed mix, things that are native to the prairie. And so it's just such a testament to how if we give nature some space and work with her, what will come out of that. Seeding methods, here's Sarah actually on one of our just seed spinners. We've played a lot with different types of equipment and have found that that really is the best. Mix that with some peat moss. Wow, so sorry. Mix that with some peat moss, and here you can see to give the seed a little boost to be able to spread out, and that's what we found. And then the Brilliant drill, which we've rented from the Conservation District, has not worked as well for us. The seed doesn't feed as easily. We haven't found the right carrier. So a lot of times we'll just use the packer wheels on the back to make sure that the seed has good ground contact after it's seeded. And it's always kind of a little bit of a crapshoot because you're like, okay, I have this seed mix. And this is the engineer in me too, right? I want to be specific and particular. Like, okay, I have this seed mix. This is the pounds per acre. But you know, when you go and you mix it in your cone and you got some peat moss in there, you're going to get close, but you may not, you're going to measure, but you don't have any like dials to really tell you exactly. So you just, there's always an act of courage of hoping it's just all going to work. This is one of our strip seedings after the first year, and we had not very good moisture content at all. So these took a long time to establish. So you can see Rusty, one of the terriers, is there. There's a lot of mustard. There's one little baby blanket flower. At any rate, mowing, Paul talked about that. That's a really important tool to just getting things to establish. The other thing we've done is just because of our crop rotation, we also have flowering plants within the crop rotation itself. So we're also providing some habitat and food sources that way. This is a picture of flax, blue flax. And that's super fun when you're in an ecosystem that just grows wheat. to have blooming things. Here's some peas that are part of our cover crop mixes. Here's oats with underseeded clover. So much to the same as what Paul does, we always underseed our grain crops with usually clover, some alfalfa, depending on where it is in the rotation. And the clover will grow that first year, and then we let it go for the next year and bloom, and that's when we plow it down as a cover crop. Here's another piece of cover crop. Guys, this was 2017. We've just come off of 3 really tough years of low moisture, highly variable climate conditions. And I was tilling in our cover crops because the tillage is a way to feed, you terminate the growing of the cover crop. So it's no longer using moisture. It's at the point in time where it's blooming. So that's the maximum amount of nitrogen fixing you're going to get into the soil. And so we terminate those with a speed tiller and then leave that residue on top of the soil so it doesn't blow, but it creates that mixing. You have to be able to feed your soil, and just leaving something here and growing doesn't necessarily, in our ecosystem, feed the soil in a way that it might in a different way, different place. So I got out of the tractor to adjust something, and I just heard this tremendous buzzing because there was a little low spot, and there's a pond, a small pond that still had some moisture in it just across the field border here. And so I ended up going around this and left it because that was just so hot and dry, and we as humans were feeling hot and dry. I can't imagine what our pollinators were doing. This year is super exciting for us. We have introduced livestock grazing actually onto our crop strips. This is a cover crop strip that's Phacelia, which is an amazing plant. If you haven't seen it, the pollinators love it. Phacelia and buckwheat. And so this was just taken the other day, and we've got awesome conditions this year. Here's just a picture of one of our native prairie places on an edge of one of our fields. And that's been really fun to just spend some time with Sarah of Xerces when she's here and do some plant ID. Like, we've had some native thistles in that world, these places. Be Better Certified is another way we've been working with Xerces Society. I'm on their board, Be Better Certified board, as a farmer representative, and we were Be Better Certified, I think, last year. It's a way to recognize habitat integrated into a farm. It's actually a third-party verification that we do in addition to our organic certification. You have to provide buffers, you have to provide nest sites, and leave enough habitat for critters. Another thing I told you I'd talk about the people part. So we think it's really important to provide a space for nature and those native insects and birds and other things that are just soil microbes. But they do a lot of work for us on the farm, and that all has to be integrated with the people that work with us on the farm. And so this is our crew of interns this year. Anne's heading to Iowa State. She's on the left in horticulture. Sam's at University of Colorado. Eddie's in Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo in the ag program, and Tim's in an environmental management program at Yale. So we let him leave for a little bit after seeding to go see Glacier, which is not too far away, Glacier National Park. Last year, our 2 apprentices, which we also have, an internship is a shorter time frame, and apprenticeship is longer, 8-month agreement. So on the left is Ben, who came to us from Massachusetts, worked on a lot of farms, was really excited about doing something at scale. And then Aubin is in the middle, and he's from France. And unfortunately, we were not able to bring him back this year due to the COVID situation and our H-2A visa work. But Aubin's grew up on a farm in France, and he's going to be taking that farm over, and was very excited about how to convert it to organic, which is how he found us. And then on the right is Paul, and Paul is our cow guy. Paul came to us through an apprenticeship program. He grew up in Buffalo, New York, and didn't grow up on a farm. And Paul's now our foreman under a long-term contract with us, and we're super excited to be helping him grow his own enterprise that's integrated to what we're doing. And then one other people slide. So on the left is another native bee. Montana has, I think, 40 some native bumblebees. They haven't been cataloged until most recently, which is pretty amazing to think about. This is on a native prairie pea plant. And then on the right are my two friends, Joel and Kyle. They're 14 and 12, and they're also coming to farm camp. So I just thought this idea of like your head down in a plant and you're looking at something, and then here we have two young guys that are also head down learning about stuff was just kind of fun. So my last slide with another poem that I really love, that I think speaks a lot to what we're trying to do here. And our farm is so much more than just a place to grow food and take care of nature. It's really a place to seed some more community. So with that, I will stop sharing and come back if I can figure out how to do that.
There you go.
There.
Well, that was great. Anna, thank you so much for that. I think we have one question right now. We definitely welcome other questions. The question we have is, have you ever tried using rice hulls as a carrier for seed?
I've heard that, and I've not been able to find any.
Okay. Wow. And I guess I want to follow up too. So obviously, you're doing a lot of things that are really positive for insect life. Some people might say, boy, that seems really inefficient. Like Paul, I guess, are you doing pretty well financially? I know you have to work another job for health insurance. I don't know how you balance the farming with the other work, but can you address your success as a farmer and how you manage another job with your farming?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess I'd say this: agriculture, regardless, it is not easy and simple. And you're not in agriculture to become rich. But I think the opportunity, especially why we're working with the young generation, is that there is no other job you can have where you get to be outside, you get to make your own decisions, you get to do something that's really important work. It's a direct connection with caring for the land and then caring for your community through food. So Doug and I come at this from a pretty philosophical base, but I will tell you that this is our 12th season and it has not been easy. We don't know how the other system that is around us, how they're actually surviving. Because when you're paying, $500 an acre for off-farm inputs, fungicides, herbicides, and your land's worth maybe 1,000, that's why you have to get big, because it's all about the production when you're selling your wheat for $3 a bushel. So one of the projects that we've started with a nonprofit that we just recently stood up to help support our apprenticeship program and have more thriving communities on the Northern Great Plains is really this idea around risk sharing. So how do we actually more equitably share risk across the whole supply chain so that farms like ours can be in business over the long run? I mean, we don't have to make $1 bazillion and live in a mansion, but we need to be able to have a regular, stable income. And I think it's super exciting to think about how we can remake it so that farms aren't just widget productions. We're not just like bushel producers of X commodity crop, right? There's all these other beneficial, awesome things to us. So I will say that coming off of 3 really tough years, we are super psyched to still be here. And I suspect that other operations would not have made it had they not been doing all the other creative thinking around that. So.
Excellent. We have a comment from Ted. Hello, Ted. Says, I was about to ask if you considered adding livestock when your slide came up with the cattle. I was very happy to see that and hear that you were doing just that. How are you working out that arrangement? Do you have a neighbor, and how does that work? Yeah,
so this is super great. Doug and I are like, we've wanted to have animals integrated for a long time, but there's a capacity issue. And we are in a place that a lot of people are like, why would I go to North Central Montana? I think we finally have got I've got the domino effect happening now. We've got a crew that has been here and loves us and sees the awesome opportunity that it is. And so it took us a while to find the right way to integrate that opportunity into our system. But it's really about Paul. He's been super excited about livestock and integrating it with a cropping system since day one, and his background in several ranch apprenticeships in Colorado, and we're trying it out. So through our network, he's found another individual that doesn't have sufficient range grazing opportunities. So we've brought the cows on. We're grazing on. We've got some pea, barley fallow strips. We've got some other side strips we're grazing. We're going to see how it does. And then the magic of this is the cows leave at the end of the season. So we're not trying to we don't have all the infrastructure around that. So it's been an awesome way to document how we can support a young new agrarian entering with his own enterprise.
That's awesome. Well, I have to ask, I mean, you've been talking a lot about how little water there is. How do they get the watering system onto your land without permanent infrastructure?
Yeah, so we've got a couple dugouts. The
Okay.
house that Paul has, and actually by super thanks to Iroquois Valley Farmland REIT, we have worked extensively with them. They're, I think we were their first kind of Western and definitely their only Montana purchase. So they actually helped us purchase some land that was Kim fallow no-till and had a house, which allowed us to have Paul be able to have a place to live. And that has a well on it that we're using for stock water as well. Yeah.
Then we have a question from Dane. Are there any cooperative systems for organic small-scale producers to pool processing resources and drive down costs?
Yeah, great question, Dane. So I think we're lucky in Montana that we have some smaller mills. The trick is we're spread way far out in Montana, and we need to think some more about that around the grain, lentils, oilseed, buckwheat production. But I also think that just the processing is not going to necessarily solve all the challenges that exist there. Paul might have something to add. I see him coming up.
Paul, do you want to say?
Yeah, for my crops, the row crops, there are a handful of buyers and brokers in the market. It's never really been a problem to sell what I produce, and some cases it goes directly to processors or to livestock feeding operations. In other cases, it's just through a broker. But yeah, there are ways to sell at least the agronomic crops. You know, I can't really speak to the vegetables and other things.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have a Montana Producers Cooperative that recently expanded from just cattle beef production to grains, and Doug's the grain manager for that. So we're trying to pool some resources to work with buyers. And some of this too is the contracting, right? Like we actually have buyers that we've really loved, but guess what? I still have their crop sitting in my bin from 2018. And yeah, and even though we have clauses in the contract that say you got to take delivery, like that impacts our cash flow ability. So this processing piece, we really need to put some more heads together on how to make it work better for processors and for farmers, because that's a ball up point for us.
Yeah, that's a good point, Anna. And one of the co-ops that I'm familiar with and work with is Organic Valley in Southwest Wisconsin, and they have pools. They have a dairy pool, and they sell fruits and vegetables and grain and all sorts of things. They're one of the larger organic marketing co-ops in the country. I think that's Organic Valley.
Okay. And I was going to ask, I mean, you've got such an extensive network of those prairie strips throughout your whole landscape. What's the secret to managing? Are you burning? How do you keep that vegetation in good shape and good sort of composition? Yeah,
well, that's a question that's starting to come up, is what's the maintenance that we need to be doing on some of the strips here behind the house. They're enrolled in the CRP program, and we're going to need to mow them here. I think they're probably 5 years old, perhaps. Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I see Sarah might be on the
She is there, I think.
So maybe
Yeah.
she could add something to the chat. But yeah, Sarah, we're going to need some help on the maintenance.
Sarah, feel free. Sarah's with the Xerxes Society. Sarah, do you want to jump on?
Oh, I put her on the spot.
Well, we were going to give Xerxes Society a little chance to talk in just a few minutes. I'm not sure if Sarah is available. If not, I have one more question for you, Anna, and then we could kind of throw it open to everybody. My last question is, you said you work so much with non-operating landowners, people who don't actually farm themselves. Do you have any advice or stories, or can you give us some insight into your relationship with those landowners, what they're looking for, any encouragement you might have for other landowners to sort of have better stewardship on their land?
Yeah, great question, Nathan. So I would say like our crop diversity is only one part of our diversity. So every one of our lease agreements is a little different. So we have lease agreements that are cash per acre. We have lease agreements that are full risk share that take a percentage of whatever the revenue is, and we're doing all the marketing. And then we have things that are in between where the landowner really wants a little bit of stable income assurance, but so we'll pay a standard fee annually, and then we'll negotiate what that risk share piece is afterwards. Every one of our contracts is long term, so it's 10 years, right? A first refusal is a minimum. And we make it a point to really have a relationship with our landowners. We want a relationship. We want them to know what's going on their farm. I guess in terms of advice, I think it'd be awesome for you guys that have land to really think differently about who do you want farming that? What kind of relationship do you want to have with them? And don't necessarily be scared if it's somebody that's not from the direct community or has a direct connection. You want them to be supported and be able to be successful in their production. But I think there's so many opportunities with so much land that's going to be turning over ownership, and we've got a real opportunity to shift what we're doing with our system.
Excellent. By the way, could everyone share their video and not mute themselves so we can see everybody? I think everyone's been very courteous in that way, but we'd actually love to see everybody. There we go. Hey, great to see everyone. Hey, Ted, great to see people that I know and other people as well. If we don't mind, Stephanie, are you there? Stephanie Fritchie from, hey, Stephanie, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, Nathan. How are you?
So good. So we had mentioned that both Anna and Paul have worked closely with the Xerxes Society over the years. So the Xerxes Society is a really sort of an amazing resource. I have one of their books handy by happen chance. And so I just wanted to give Stephanie a chance just to talk a little bit about what the Xerxes Society is and how people can access the resources.
Sure, and I have a very short PowerPoint, Nathan.
Oh, sure, go for it.
Do you share or do I share?
You share, yep, you share. There you go.
How's that look?
That looks great.
Yeah, so, okay. Thanks to Nathan and to Anna and Doug and Paul for being on today, and also my colleagues at Xerxes. We had Sarah Foltz-Jordan, who worked a lot with these farmers, and Sarah Nizzi, who's also based in Iowa. Ray Powers, based in Nebraska, was also on, and Michelle Blackburn, who's farther west. And I'm actually based in Northwest Indiana. I'm also a Purdue grad. I'm not far from West Lafayette now, so shout out to Anna and Doug. I didn't know your Purdue connection either, but Xerxes is North America's and probably the world's largest nonprofit conservation organization dedicated to pollinators and invertebrates and beneficial insects. And so we have around 50 staff here. We're named after the Xerxes blue butterfly, which was the first butterfly to go extinct in North America due to human activity. And so what began as a butterfly conservation organization. It's not really this large and diverse group here. Working also in about a dozen states headquartered out in Oregon, but all throughout the country. And our work is focused in agricultural biodiversity, endangered species, aquatic invertebrates, pesticide policy and mitigation, also urban conservation, and then on a higher level policy and advocacy. We also have a whole team of partner biologists who work in our CS offices and in capacity to help deliver many of these Farm Bill programs that have been mentioned, like CRP and CSP. And talking with Nathan a bit, he and I have been talking about these ideas for over a year now, and it's just great to see this webinar series come together. So just to add a bit more about Xerces, we also just have a wonderful publications library with a few of those publications pictured here. Some of these are books, some of these are handbooks, some of these are pamphlets. You can access everything free or as PDFs here on our publications library. And there are many different filters that you can apply. And in addition to farming with native beneficial insects and attracting native pollinators, which those are our books, and those actually are not free, but everything else is free. But the books, there is a cost for that. But relevant to today's webinar, we have habitat planning for beneficial insects. And also another new publication is a guide to Iowa's native thistles. Of course, Canada thistle is actually not native, despite its name. It's not a North American species, it's from Eurasia, and it can be a bad weed, but we have over a dozen different native thistles, which are just wonderful plants for all kinds of insects, both the flower and the seed resources in those. And also I'm excited just to say that forthcoming, we have some publications. One is Farming for Soil Life, about all the invertebrates that are in soil and how those relate to soil health. We also have a fact sheet coming out about strips practices and particularly that balance between providing wildlife benefit and crop yield benefit with the risk of creating a sink or threatening those insects and plants with pesticide exposure. And then as was alluded to earlier, Sarah and Paul and others there in Iowa have been working on these beetle banks fact sheet. So that was my little intro, Nathan. And again, if Sarah Foltz-Jordan or any other Xerces folks who are on the call want to jump in, please do.
Well, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Really appreciate you sharing that and really appreciate the work of the Xerces Society. If no one else is going to jump in, I want to give Paul and Anna sort of a last chance to share some thoughts about farming insects and the mindset that it takes for you to be successful. And Paul, would you like to start and just say some concluding remarks?
Yeah, I guess one thing I would like to say is that anyone who has questions, my contact information was part of my presentation, and I would love to have anyone call me if they have questions or just want to talk about either organic farming or strips and prairie habitat. I'd love to visit with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. Anna?
I'm inspired, and thanks for the opportunity to present. And if any of you know young people that want to actually do the hard work of farming, send them our way. Or you know, if you know any other land investors, there's 11,000 acres on the market up right contiguous with stuff we're already farming on the border. So we have visions of stripping that as well.
Excellent. Well, again, Paul and Anna, thank you so much for sharing so enthusiastically what you're doing. I know you've also have challenges at times that have been probably pretty hard. One of the things that I've really concluded is that, boy, farming matters way more than people realize in terms of food, the state of our world, the state of our rural communities, and frankly, the life of farmers. Farmers should be able to live decent, satisfying lives without being in fear. So I'm just so grateful that both of you are doing what you can and sharing your knowledge. Along those lines, I want to thank everyone who's attended, both today's and previous sessions. We're just really grateful for your interest, and I hope that you'll continue to sort of strive to sort of create a better farming system. For those of you who are farmers and farmland owners, I just wish you the best with your land and your farming this year and in future years. Someone did ask very quickly, I think, I'm not sure which book they mentioned, were wondering about. One was Lentil Underground by Liz Carlisle about organic farming in Montana. It's an excellent book. The other one was Farming with Native Beneficial Insects from the Xerxes Society. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate your generosity of spirit and your desire to sort of move our farming system forward. Take care. I'll be sending an email with further links from the Xerxes Society, but thanks again for joining us. Have a great day.